Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our College Talk, Dollars and Degrees, How to Pay for College, which is a part of our College Admissions Literacy Series, a series dedicated to bringing students and families better information about higher education and better access to college admissions. My name is Tim Kent, and I'm the admission manager at College. We are thrilled to have so many of you students and parents joining us tonight. I am excited for all of the insight that our wonderful speaker, our very own Jeff Teng, has to share with us tonight, and am confident that you all will walk away enlightened and empowered about the financial aid landscape. But first, a couple of brief housekeeping notes before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be sent out to all of you. So we do encourage you to be present during tonight's session and know that you will have the recording for later use and reference. If you are someone who is watching our live stream on YouTube and would like the recording sent to you, I'm going to drop the Eventbrite link into the chat box now. So please take a second to fill out the form to get your copy. Our goal here is to reach as many members of the community as possible with relevant college-related information. So please feel free to enter a comment in the chat box to let us know if you're finding this useful, and hit like if you are streaming on YouTube. Also, I want to encourage all of you to pop any questions into the Q&A box that you can find down below as we go, if any questions come to mind. I'm going to be keeping track of all of your questions and facilitating a Q&A with Jeff at the end of tonight's event. Again, if you don't know where the Q&A feature is, just roll your mouse over the bottom of your Zoom screen and you should see a little icon labeled Q&A. We're going to have time for questions, and we're going to try to get to as many as we have time for. So I want to encourage all of you to ask anything that comes up. Okay, so before we get into tonight's talk, I know that there's probably a lot of different topics on your mind surrounding the financial aid landscape of college. So what we'd like to do is start out with a poll just to get a sense of what really is on your mind, and to know and make sure that we're covering the right things to be as helpful as all of you, as helpful as we can to all of you tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. So take a few seconds to look through the choices and click anything that applies to you of things that are on your mind. I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll right now. So the good news is that out of the first few poll results, I'm seeing that one of the most popular results is common financial aid mistakes to avoid, and we are going to get to that in the very next slide. So that's great. And we've also got a lot of people wondering about filling out the FAFSA and CSS profile, critical forms that are essential parts of this process, and a few other things too. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. And with that, next slide, please. Here are the 5 most common mistakes. I'm going to go ahead and read through these briefly, but just know that these are all things that are on so many families' minds, and things that Jeff has come across in his experience, his years of experience in financial aid, and things that are going to be covered this evening. So the first one, in terms of most common mistakes, is assuming ineligibility, kind of making early assumptions about what you can qualify for, what you can't qualify for, and immediately ruling out or creating a path based on those maybe misconceived assumptions. The second one is missing deadlines. There's critical deadlines for this process, and it's very important to be keeping track of what they are. The third one, of course, as we discussed just a moment ago, is sending out that FAFSA and CSS profile too narrowly. The fourth one, and one that I'm interested in hearing more about from Jeff, is actually setting up a college savings in your child's name. And then 5, and another really good and important one, is not taking advantage of applying for scholarships. There's so many great scholarships out there and a lot of different places to find them and apply. So not taking advantage of that is another common mistake. So next slide. So before we begin, I do want to share a little bit about who we are at ColEdge. For those of you who are joining us for the first time tonight, ColEdge is a private college admissions advisory group. We are a team of experienced admissions professionals who work closely with students and their families anywhere on their path to higher education. Our work helps students identify and apply to best right fit colleges and ignite their deeper potential. So what you're seeing here in this little graphic on our slide is a table that has some really exciting data showing a few of our key student outcomes on average over the past 6 years. And what you can see is that our students have done very well in applying to top schools around the country. You may even recognize one or more of these institutions. So let's focus on a couple of examples before we dive into tonight's conversation. You'll notice that the admit rate for UCLA on a whole is right around 12%. But for students who've worked with ColEdge, our admit rate is at 34.8%. Similarly, we have Northwestern University in Chicago with an admit rate of around 6.4%. But students working with us were admitted at a rate of 22.2%. That's more than triple the chances of success. But the reason that we feel we do so well is that we're deeply focused on fit. We call it the best right fit. By working with your child and taking the time to understand their interests, their strengths, and their goals for their future, we partner with our families to set up all of our students for a successful and rewarding college process. So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our financial aid expert for the evening, Jeff Teng. Jeff has worked in higher education for over 15 years, and he started out in the financial aid office at USC as a financial aid counselor. Now, he works at USC's Marshall School of Business in undergraduate advising and in student affairs. And of course, we're very lucky to have him as one of our own team leads at ColEdge. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're really excited to have this conversation and to hear all of the tremendous insight that you have.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here and excited to share all of my financial aid knowledge with all of you. My goal for today's presentation is really to help demystify the financial aid process and really prepare all of you to dive into this financial aid process and start working with the schools that your students are applying to. So for today's presentation, I'm going to start out by going over some common financial aid terminology that you're going to hear throughout the financial aid process. Then I'm going to talk about the different types of aid that you would potentially be applying for through this process, how to apply for financial aid. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about scholarships and where to find them and how to apply for those as well. I will provide some insider tips that I've learned through my years working in the financial aid office. Then we'll go over some extra resources to help guide you through the process. And then we'll close with an opportunity for some questions that you might have. All right, so starting with some financial aid terminology. Again, these are going to be very common terms and phrases that you're going to hear as you go through the financial aid process. The first term I want to talk about is need-based aid. So this is pretty self-explanatory. This is basically referring to any financial aid that you'll be applying for that is based on the student and family's finances. So based on the family's income, assets, the information that's submitted through the FAFSA, the financial aid application. The second type of financial aid is called merit-based aid, and this is commonly also known as scholarships. And this type of financial aid is really based on a student's academic record, so their grades or their extracurricular involvement, rather than a student's or family's financial picture. The next couple of terms I want to talk about are federal methodology and institutional methodology. So these refer to the ways that financial aid eligibility is calculated. So federal methodology is the way that the federal government uses the information on the FAFSA to determine a student's financial aid eligibility based on the family's income, assets, and other criteria. Institutional methodology is very similar. However, it's what certain schools, especially private schools, use in addition to the federal methodology to capture a bigger picture. Typically, private schools offer up more of their own money when awarding need-based aid. So they have a little bit more strict requirements when calculating financial aid. So they have their own methodology when it comes to those calculations. The next term is the cost of attendance. And basically this term refers to what the school estimates as the total cost for that student to attend for that year. So this number will include things like room and board, tuition and fees, travel expenses, books and supplies, that type of, those types of expenses. The next term you'll hear a lot is expected family contribution, also known as the EFC. So the EFC is the number that is calculated based on the information provided through the FAFSA financial aid application. And basically this refers to the number that the federal government or the institution expects a family to contribute over the course of that year towards the student's education. And then finally, we have financial need. So financial need is essentially the cost of attendance minus the expected family contribution. And the result of that is the financial need. And the financial need is important, and that's because that's the number that schools will use to determine how much financial aid they're going to award to a student. So now this is a sample, just a sample financial aid notification, just to kind of put into context all the terminology that I just went over. So this is a very common financial aid award notice that you're going to see in a lot of schools. Most of these are now going to be digital, where you would log in, or the student would log into a financial aid portal for that school. Once everything is calculated and submitted, the financial aid award letter will be on that portal. So to point out some of the key components of this portal, many times the school will list their cost of attendance right on the financial aid award notification. So you'll see for this sample school, the cost of attendance is about $56,000, and it tells you exactly what goes into that number. So this one includes tuition, fees, housing, books, meals, transportation. So this is what the school estimates what will cost the student to attend for that year. The next section is eligibility factors, and this is the area where schools will tell you exactly kind of the eligibility factors that they take into account when calculating the financial aid package. So you're going to see things like enrollment status, housing status, the number of people in the student's family, and the number in college. All of these figures are important because it affects the cost of attendance. It affects how much a family can contribute to the student's education. For example, for the enrollment status, if a student is half-time as opposed to full-time, that's going to drastically affect the financial aid package because that reduces the cost of tuition. Whether a student lives on campus or at home with their family will also affect the cost of attendance and therefore impact the financial aid eligibility. The number of people the student has in their family, if they have siblings, and also if there's any siblings in college at the same time. All of those will contribute to the student's financial eligibility and what the college is able to offer. And then the next section, finally, you'll see the actual awards and the amounts that the college is offering that student. So for this student, just for example purposes, we list out, there's a lot of financial aid offered, starting with different types of grants. There's federal work study, and then there's loans, and then it breaks it down between 2 semesters for semester system schools. There's also sections for students to accept the award or decline the award or maybe change the amount. And this happens a lot for declining awards when a family maybe doesn't want to accept work study because a student doesn't want to work that their first year, perhaps because they want to really focus on school, or if they don't really want to borrow any loans, they can choose not to accept those awards. And then lastly, on this sample award letter, there's outside scholarships and resources. So if your student is receiving any kind of other outside scholarships, you would report that to the school. The school will also take that into account as part of the student's financial aid as well.
So Jeff, one thing that I'm kind of seeing here is that schools and financial aid offices are really looking for a family to paint a really holistic picture of their financial situation, kind of taking multiple factors into account, kind of a lot of similar to the way that we see them doing holistic review with applications and profiles, for the admissions process. Is that kind of holistic picture correct? Is that sort of the common way that these offices approach this process?
That is correct. Financial aid offices will want to know basically everything they can about a family's financial picture. And that's why the financial aid packages or the financial aid applications like the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which I'll talk about in a minute, they're really long applications. There's a lot of information that they're trying to capture. It's not just based on how much a family makes every year or how much they have in the bank. Really, it takes into account a lot of all of their assets. And again, things like number of students in their college, number of people in their family. All of this goes into what a school takes into account when calculating financial aid eligibility.
That's great to know. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah. All right, so now that you've seen some of this financial aid on an award letter, I want to talk about what the difference is between all of the financial aid and the different types of financial aid. So the first type is grants, and really this is the type of financial aid that everybody wants. This is free money, essentially, that doesn't need to be paid back. So there are essentially three sources of grant money. The first one is federal grants, and these are commonly known as the Pell Grant or the SEOG grant, and typically these are only awarded to really high-need students. The second source is the state. So for example, in California, we have the California Student Aid Commission that awards the Cal Grant. So for students who are eligible for that, the state does provide the Cal Grant. And then finally, the university grant as well. So many schools will have their own pool of funds that they will offer need-based university grants as part of the financial aid package. The second type of financial aid is student loans. So this is something that a lot of people know about. And there are two types of student loans or federal student loans. One is the subsidized student loan, and this is a need-based loan. And the second one is unsubsidized, which is not as need-based. Subsidized student loans are loans where the interest starts accruing. However, the government is subsidizing the interest, meaning they are paying the interest while the student is in school. And these loans do not enter repayment until the student is done with school. So essentially, there is no interest. The student doesn't have to worry about the interest that is accruing while they are enrolled in college. They won't start getting the interest accruing until they are in repayment once they are done. For unsubsidized student loans, the interest will start accruing right away as soon as the loan is dispersed. So that's why these aren't as need-based, because the student or the family is still responsible for paying all of the interest, but also the repayment does not begin until the student is done with school. The interest rates are fixed rate, and they tend to be pretty good interest rates as compared to private loans. For the 2021-2022 academic year, so this current academic year that's happening now, the federal direct loan is at a 3.73% interest rate. And again, for subsidized student loans, that interest rate won't start kicking in until the student is done with their program. There's also a federal Parent Plus loan, and these are loans that are taken out under the parent's name. The interest rate is slightly higher at 6.28%. The third type of aid is work study. So this is a sum of money, typically around $3,000 for the academic year, that the students can only get if they are working a job. So they have to earn this money and get paid an hourly wage that gets paid out of this pool of money. Having a work study award does make students more attractive to campus departments that are looking for work study students, because that means that the student's salary or their wage is subsidized partially by the federal government through this pool of money. So the school department that's hiring them can pay them a little bit less out of their own funds. So having work study is beneficial if a student is looking for a part-time job.
So Jeff, I'm wondering, is it possible for a financial aid office to offer to include all three of these types of aid? And if that's the case, would a family have to choose to either accept all three or decline all three, or could they choose to accept one or two and then decline another?
Yeah, so it's very common for a financial aid package to contain all three types of aid. Typically for students with higher need, they will see all types of aid. Schools, when awarding financial aid, schools will typically start with loans and work study, awarding those first. And then if there's still financial need left and there are grants to award, they'll start awarding those as well. And on the financial aid offer letter, when they receive that, they can choose which ones they want to accept. So for example, for like work study, again, if a student just doesn't really want to work, the parents really want the student to really focus on their academics, they can choose to decline the work study and perhaps maybe increase the amount of a Parent Plus loan that they borrow instead to make up for the money that they won't be getting from work study. Most schools, if you decline a loan or work study, they're not going to make it up with grant money, for example. That's a little too wishful thinking, but there are other ways of making up like work study funds with loan eligibility if a family wants to do that.
Okay, got it. It sounds like there's a lot of options and flexibility.
For sure, definitely. All right, so now that you know about the different types of financial aid that's out there, how do you apply for it? How do you get it? So there are definitely a lot of different documents and application forms that you're going to need to know about. The first and foremost application that you'll need to know about is the free application for federal student aid, also known as the FAFSA. This is filled out online. It's a pretty extensive form that asks for income information, assets, again, like number of people in the student's family, just a lot of information. Luckily, it's been made easier recently where they have a tool on their website where you can automatically load your income tax information directly onto the form so that you don't really have to fill every single thing out. So that makes it a lot easier. So just make sure when you're filling out this form that your taxes from the previous year have been filed. The next application is the College Board CSS profile. This is an application that's very similar to the FAFSA. It's mostly required from private institutions. Again, when they're using that institutional methodology, they ask for more information, and this is the way that they get that information is through the CSS profile. It's a pretty robust application. And again, it's mostly asked for by private institutions to get a bigger picture of a family's financial situation. The next document is the California GPA verification form. This is something that you typically don't really need to worry about as much, but it does need to be turned in if the student wants to be considered for the Cal Grant. So this is a state grant for its California residents. Typically, this is automatically taken care of by the student's high school. High schools will automatically send their high school GPA information to the California Student Aid Commission. So students and families don't have to worry about this. Next, we have the federal tax returns and W-2s. So a lot of times schools will want to verify the information that's on the FAFSA. So they will ask families to submit federal tax returns and the W-2s just to verify information. And the federal government might also randomly select students as well to submit this information just as for audit purposes as well, just to verify everything is accurate. And then beyond that, every school will have additional forms that might be required depending on a family situation. If something isn't clear on the FAFSA or the CSS profile and more information is required, or the school just wants a little bit more information, they'll let you know which forms that they want you to fill out. For example, if parents are divorced or separated, a lot of them will ask for a custodial parent form or more information about the family situation just to get a better picture of that as well. All right, so next I want to talk a little bit about professional judgment. So professional judgment basically happens after the financial aid application is submitted and you receive your financial aid award. So when you receive your financial aid award and you realize, that's not going to be enough to cover it, and maybe you don't think that the college took into account certain information, or maybe there's been a change in your family's financial situation. This is where you can submit an appeal to the school. And the school can use their professional judgment to determine whether or not they can award the student more financial aid. This is more common with private institutions, again, because they tend to use more of their own funds in the financial aid package, and therefore they have a little bit more leeway of how they want to treat financial aid or the family's calculations and take certain things into account. So there are a couple of common categories that schools will review appeals for. The first one is a reduction in income and earnings. So this has been, pretty common in the past year, specifically with COVID-19, where companies shut down. A lot of people went into quarantine, and this affected a lot of families' incomes. So, for example, if a family did have a reduction in income and it wasn't reflected in the previous year's tax information, that was what the FAFSA was based on, a family can submit an appeal to request some professional judgment to see if financial aid can be covered. When I was working in the financial aid office at USC, I saw several appeals every year from parents who lost their jobs, and this was not even during COVID, where the family's financial situation changed. Their income was drastically reduced. They might have gone from a dual income family to a single income family. So they would submit a letter. The school would ask for more information, and so the information that the school requested would be things like a termination letter, the last paycheck the parent received, just documents that will verify the information that they're getting from the family. Another category that a family could submit an appeal for is extraordinary expenses. So these are things like maybe medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance, or just unexpected expenses that came up during the year that the family was not planning on, and that drastically reduced or affected a family's ability to contribute to the student's education for that year. And again, this could also be very related to COVID. COVID-19 has caused a lot of families to experience extraordinary expenses with medical bills if a family suffered from COVID-19, or anything else, any other kind of expenses. I highly encourage, if there's any kind of extra financial information that you can provide to the school that you think a school is not capturing through the FAFSA or other documents, all it takes is for you to submit a letter or an email to that school's financial aid office, and that'll kickstart the process, and the school will review that letter, and then they will reach out to the student to determine and ask for any additional information that they might require.
So Jeff, kind of what I'm seeing here is that there actually is a lot more wiggle room and kind of flexibility throughout the process, that it's not necessarily so black and white where you submit your documents, they get reviewed, and you're either confirmed and you are given aid, or you're denied, and that's it. And then there's sort of no further recourse, that it's an ongoing process, just in the same way that your family's financial circumstances are constantly changing, and that professional judgment highlights that. Could you provide an example of what might happen after a professional judgment appeal, like what that process might look ongoing?
Sure. So, a couple of things can happen once a family submits their appeal. After they, submit all the documents that the university requires, the university will either tell them, based on the information, we unfortunately can't offer any more money, or they can say, hey, we looked at your situation. We recognize that, your family has lost a job and the income is drastically different. Basically, what's going to happen is they're going to use the current year's income information based on the pay stubs and all the documentation that they've asked for, and they will basically kind of redo the FAFSA for the family and input new numbers that are going to be lower for income, for example, and then they will recalculate the expected family contribution based on that new information and provide a new offer letter of financial aid. And then if the family is still thinking that's not going to be enough, or they think more can be done, they can have the financial aid office reevaluate, but they have to provide additional information. So if there's no new information to review, then nothing's going to change about the financial aid award letter. But as long as there's still information that's coming in, that's always another chance of reviewing the application.
Thanks for clarifying, Jeff.
All right, so this chart provides some great information just for you to compare how different schools across the country handle financial aid at their institutions. I really wanted to highlight 3 schools that are pretty different, just to show how these types of schools treat financial aid. So the first one I want to highlight is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is a state school in California. It's a public institution. Their total cost of attendance is right about $29,000. They're a relatively large school. If you look at the column that says percent need met, this refers to how much of a student's calculated financial need this school will meet with their financial aid package. So on average, they meet about 55% of a student's financial need. And for state schools, this is pretty common because state schools tend to not have as big of an endowment or as much resources to award university grants that can fully meet a student's financial need. The next column is the percent receiving merit aid. So this is non-need aid. So about 21% of Cal Poly SLO students receive some sort of merit aid. And then the very last column, the average merit aid award amount is just under $2,000. So for students who are receiving a scholarship or merit aid from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, it's going to be about $2,000. Again, that might be on the lower side, but again, it's a state school, so that definitely affects the amount of merit aid a student receives. The next school I want to highlight is George Washington University. So George Washington University is kind of a mid-sized private school. Their total cost of attendance is $74,000. They're able, because they are a private school, they're able to meet a little bit more of a student's financial need. So on average, they're meeting about 84%. So not quite 100%, but they are covering a good chunk of a student's calculated financial need. And I guess where they kind of make up for that is through their merit aid. So about almost, more than half of their students are receiving some kind of scholarship award. And the amount of that award averages to be about $21,000, which is a pretty sizable amount of merit aid, which a student doesn't have to pay back, and it's awarded based on a student's academic record. And then the last school I want to point out is Vanderbilt University. So this again is another private school, has a similar cost of attendance as George Washington University. I want to point out their percent need met is 100%. So this school likely has a rule that they will meet 100% of the student's calculated financial need with their need-based aid. They have about 20% that receive merit aid, and the amount is about $25,000 on average for their students that receive merit aid. So a smaller amount of their students receive merit aid compared to George Washington, but for Vanderbilt, they do meet 100% of a student's financial needs. So they really focus more on kind of the lower middle income students when offering financial aid.
So Jeff, this is really interesting, this table, to me, because I think that there's probably a lot of families that believe that if affording college is something that's a big piece of anxiety, that the target should be public universities, where the cost is going to be cheaper than a private university. But what this maybe seems to suggest is that even if the cost is higher for private universities, that actually there's a lot of aid to be found at these private schools. And also there's a lot of need met, a higher percentage of need met, even if there is a higher cost. So I'm wondering, are there specific kind of groups of private schools or specific private schools that are particularly generous with their aid, other than maybe some of the schools that we see here?
Definitely. So there is a common misconception that just because a school is a public school and a student is a resident of that state, that it's going to be automatically cheaper than a private institution, which isn't necessarily the case. If a student is high financial need and they're applying for private schools, they could qualify for a significant amount of financial aid that might actually make it end up being cheaper than a public institution. And definitely certain private schools are going to be more generous with merit aid and need-based aid than others. A lot of schools might have financial aid policies where if a student's income is below a certain threshold, that they're going to make the commitment to cover their tuition costs. There are certain schools like smaller liberal arts universities, which are private schools, but offer very generous merit packages. And these are schools that are like Ursinus College or Allegheny College, smaller liberal arts schools that have great academic programs that your student might be really interested in. But you may have never heard of them, but they're worth looking into because of the generous merit aid packages that they offer. So speaking of merit-based aid, I want to talk a little bit about what that is and how to get them and who offers them. So there are two general sources of merit-based aid or scholarships, and that is from the university themselves or outside scholarships, and those have various resources as well. So university scholarships, a lot of these can be applied for through the admissions process. Alumni associations often offer scholarships. A student's major department, if your student is an athlete, all of these are awarded through the university. So these are great resources for scholarships. And for outside scholarships, these can come from a variety of resources. If your student was members of high school clubs that have national chapters like Amnesty International or the Key Club, Kiwanis, sometimes they offer small scholarships as part of those organizations. Private donors or corporations, I know a lot of bigger companies, for example, might offer scholarship opportunities for their employees, children to go to college, things like that. So these are two of the major groups and resources that offer merit scholarships.
Jeff, I'm wondering, do you always have to submit extra applications for those merit-based scholarships? Obviously, the process is a lot of work as it is, a lot of applications, a lot of deadlines. Is it always the case that for those extra merit scholarships that there's additional applications needed?
So a lot of schools will offer scholarships directly through the admissions process, and there won't be any other documents or applications required. So for example, schools like Boston University or USC, just by filling in their or submitting their application for admission by a priority deadline, you will automatically be considered for their scholarships as part of the admissions process. However, with other departments within that university, like alumni associations or a major department or any other organizations within the school, those will typically require additional scholarship or additional applications that a student will need to submit. And same thing for outside scholarships; those will always require additional applications as well. All right, so I wanted to highlight 3 different universities and talk a little bit about the different scholarships that these schools offer. The first one being USC, being that, I currently have worked there for several years. I wanted to highlight some of the scholarships that they offer. So USC, as I mentioned, is one of those schools that offers scholarships directly through the admissions process. So if you submit the admissions application by their priority deadline of December 1st, you will automatically be considered for the trustee scholarship, presidential scholarship, dean scholarship. And these are tuition awards. Trustee is basically a full tuition scholarship. Presidential is a half tuition scholarship, and then the dean scholarship is a quarter tuition scholarship. So these are pretty generous amounts. And then they also have other scholarships like the Leadership Award, the Associate Scholarship. They have an organization called Town and Gown, and several alumni groups that offer scholarships as well. For the ones that are offered through admissions, again, you don't have to submit anything else. But for groups like the alumni associations or Town and Gown, those will require separate applications. And several universities, especially private universities, will have similar scholarship processes through their admissions application. I want to talk a little bit about the UC system. So being that we're in California, a lot of our students at college apply for University of California schools, UC schools. They also have a scholarship program known as the Middle Class Scholarship Program. And this is really, it's a scholarship, but also based a little bit on need, in that it takes into account a family's income. And basically, if a family's income is reported below the threshold that they've set for the scholarship, the family could potentially be eligible for the scholarship called the Middle Class Scholarship Program. This program is also available at the Cal State University system as well. Certain UCs like UC Berkeley will have scholarships like the Regent Scholarship or the Chancellor Scholarship. That's also part of the admissions process. And a lot of times these scholarships offer more than just aid as part of the financial aid package. They might offer other benefits like free room and board or different research opportunities and things like that that a student can take advantage of once they're on campus. So scholarships don't necessarily just mean money to pay for tuition. And lastly, I want to talk about Ursinus College, and this is one of those small private liberal arts schools that offer very generous aid packages that a lot of families might not have heard of. For Ursinus College, this school offers a lot of different scholarships called the Zacharias Honor Scholarship, the Ursinus Gateway Scholarship. They have the Reverend Charles Rice Memorial Scholarship, Merit Scholarships, Legacy Scholarships for students of alumni. So all of these vary in amounts. Some of these scholarships will cover full tuition, partial tuition, or smaller amounts like the smaller merit scholarships. But again, Ursinus is really just one of those schools that have great academic programs and great financial aid awards or merit awards that a lot of families should consider. Okay, now I just want to highlight one of the students I had the opportunity to work with a couple of years ago. We're going to call her Mary for privacy's sake. We won't use her real name. So just to kind of go over her basic profile, she was a very bright student. She had a 3.89 unweighted GPA in high school, and she had an ACT composite score of 31, which is a great score, not the highest score, but definitely a very competitive score. But she was also very, very involved in her high school. She was an intern with a program called Stand With Us. She was a fellow for the Dillard Teen Fellows program, an academic mentor at the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles. She was a delegate in the Model UN. She was a founder and president of 2 clubs at her school, the School Feminist Club and the Middle East Affairs Club, and then a junior counselor at Tom Sawyer Camp. So she was definitely very active and very involved. And she applied for a lot of schools. I believe she applied for up to 20 schools and when she worked with us, and not all of them were, she said she didn't seek out help for all of those schools, but we helped her with a good chunk of them. So when she got her financial aid offers or her scholarship offers and admissions letters, she had a lot to choose from, and she was very happy with the choices that she had. So just to go over some of the acceptances and merit award offers that she received, she applied regular decision at Brandeis University and was awarded the International Business Scholar. At Lewis and Clark, she applied early action and got a $19,000 merit award and a $2,000 community service award. And all of these are going to be per year, so renewable each year. At Grinnell University, she received a significant scholarship. Gettysburg, and again, these are some of those smaller liberal arts schools as well. At Gettysburg, she received a $25,000 scholarship. Case Western, $20,000. At Denison, she received $26,000. And Mills, $24,000, and George Washington University, she got $20,000 a year. So she really had her pick of schools. A lot of these scholarships help eliminate the financial decision that she had to make, and she could really focus on choosing the best right fit for her.
Yeah, Jeff, this is, Mary's profile. She sounds like a tremendous student and involved in quite a number of activities and is going to bring a lot to any community she chooses to join. I'm wondering, is this sort of typical, a student of Mary's caliber? Is it typical for a student like her to receive the level of offers that she is and from so many different schools?
I think it's definitely typical for a student like Mary with a pretty relatively high GPA and ACT scores and such active involvement, which I think is really important as to why she was able to get such great offers. When schools, review admissions applicants, they're looking for students who they think will be great at their school, who are a good fit for them, who will represent their school's values. And so if a student can demonstrate that through their involvement, through the application, students or the schools will want to recruit students like Mary, and therefore offer merit awards to try to persuade Marys to join them and go to their school. All right, so as we wrap up, I want to go over some final thoughts and really some key takeaways that that you should all keep in mind when going through the financial aid process. first and foremost, and we mentioned this at the beginning, is really don't assume that you're not eligible. Even if you feel like, you make a decent living and have a pretty high income, I think it's always good to still apply for financial aid. Never assume that you're not eligible. At the very least, you can be eligible to borrow federal loans, which are pretty low interest. Also, a lot of scholarship applications require that a student submits a FAFSA anyway, even though they might not be need-based. That's kind of the initial step to apply for a lot of scholarships. So really never assume that you're not eligible. It's a free application. All it takes is some time to fill it out. Second one is very important. It's really just to be aware of deadlines. Financial aid, scholarship deadlines, they're super strict. Even if a student is maybe a day late on a scholarship application or turning in a financial aid document, that could significantly impact the amount of financial aid that a student gets from that school. So really be cognizant of deadlines, set reminders, always make sure that everything is turned in on time. The third thing is follow schools on social media. And I think this is something that a lot of parents or a lot of students don't realize is such a beneficial resource. And I don't mean just following, the actual school social media account, which you should definitely do as well, but dive into all the different departments that are at that school. If a student is a business major, follow the School of Businesses account, or their advising office, or their careers office. Follow the alumni associations, follow all of these different offices on social media. That way you'll learn about all of these different scholarship opportunities, as well as get reminders about deadlines. I operate the undergraduate advising and student affairs Instagram account for the Marshall School of Business at USC, and I'm always posting scholarship opportunities and posting reminders of deadlines on our Instagram account. So it's just a great resource for students to use to really be reminded of these opportunities. And lastly, really consider alternate sources of financial support. If maybe you didn't qualify for financial aid and didn't get any merit aid, there's still opportunities to help reduce costs. Campuses will have employment opportunities. The students can consider, positions like being a resident assistant, which for many schools will offer free room and board as compensation, and that can, greatly reduce costs as well. And also, just because a student doesn't get a financial aid offer or a merit award offer for their first year doesn't mean that they can't apply again for the second, third, and fourth year. Using my current position, for example, at the Marshall School of Business, we actually specifically also offer scholarships for continuing students only. So that new students can't apply for these awards. It's really only for students who've been in our school. There's a scholarship pool just for them. So there's always going to be more opportunities for students to seek out financial aid or scholarships. And with that, I'm going to jump into some resources that I think you should all take advantage of when you're going through the financial aid process. The first one is the net price calculator. And this is a resource that all schools have on their financial aid website. And basically it's a calculator where you can input your information about your income and assets. And then it'll use that information along with the school's cost of attendance, and it'll give you an estimate of what the sticker price is going to be for that school, and basically what your family will be estimated to pay after they take into account things like financial aid. And similarly, on the College Board website, where you would fill out the CSS profile, they also have the EFC calculator. So if you're just curious to kind of see what your expected family contribution might be without filling out the FAFSA just yet, they have an EFC calculator on the College Board website that'll give you a pretty good estimate of what your expected family contribution is going to be. And lastly, there's a website called fastweb.com, which is essentially like a Google for scholarships. This is a website where a student can set up their profile and input a lot of their own demographic information. And this website will spit out a bunch of different scholarships that a student could potentially apply for and be eligible for. There are so many different scholarships out there with different criteria. Some scholarships are very specific, like you have to be a descendant of a World War II veteran, or you have to have a parent who works for a certain company. So definitely a lot of scholarship opportunities are out there, and FastWeb is one of the search engines you can take advantage of. All right, with that said, I'm going to hand.
Wow. Jeff, that was amazing. That was incredible. I know I learned a tremendous amount. I, in particular, was really surprised about sort of the differentiation between public universities and private universities and colleges, and how there's so much aid to be found. I personally thought that the best way to afford college was to really hone in on those state schools. So I think it's great to know. I think I learned, and we all learned, a tremendous amount tonight, Jeff. So thank you so much for this wonderful information and insight. I'm looking forward to getting to the questions. But before we dive in, we've talked about a couple of resources here, and obviously we've learned a great deal tonight. But if you feel like you need more help with managing and understanding the finances of attending college for your family, or any element of your child's admissions process, please reach out to us directly, especially you parents of seniors. Things are going to start moving really quickly this fall as school picks up. We're excited and we're ready to help. The first step is so easy and it's complimentary. If you're interested in learning more about our counseling packages at college, please reach out through the contact info that we're going to put into the chat right now. We will schedule a free consultation phone call with you to learn about your child and to see if we are a good match. So before we dive into some question and answer with Jeff, I now want to turn your attention to our screen here and to the graphic we have, and invite each of you to join us for the next event in our series. It's called Do You See What I See? A closer look at the UC application. Our application specialist, Tina Nguyen, a current admissions reader for one of the UC campuses and former admission officer at USC, will be walking us through the UC application, offering insights on how best to utilize every opportunity within the application. It's coming up on Sunday, October 24th at 6 p.m. You won't want to miss it. I'm going to post the link to register into the chat box now. Okay, so we do have some time for questions, and I'm excited to get to some of those questions. The first one, kind of piggybacking off of our resources slide. Jeff, are there other resources to finding scholarships aside from FastWeb? It seems like there's so many great scholarships out there, so many opportunities, and I'm sure families don't want to miss those opportunities. Are there any other resources aside from FastWeb?
The major resource that I always refer students and families to is directly to the schools themselves and exploring the schools, each individual school's financial aid website. Oftentimes the financial aid website will provide links to outside scholarships that their students commonly apply for, and also to other university scholarships that the student can apply for too. So they'll provide links to alumni associations, to athletics clubs, to major departments that offer scholarships. So really the best resource, in addition to just researching on FastWeb, is directly to the universities themselves, and really either asking them directly, speak with a financial aid counselor, or exploring their website, because there's a lot of information on the financial aid websites.
That's great. So the next question that we have is kind of circling back to the FAFSA profile, and wondering, is the income on that FAFSA profile for, let's say, a senior, a fall senior applying for admission for the next year, is that income for the FAFSA profile based on previous years and not the current income? Would you be able to clarify, in terms of the tax returns and the income, which years it's actually based off of?
Sure. So FAFSA bases their calculations on what's called the prior year. So for students who are going to be entering school for fall of 2022, their FAFSA and tax returns that they should be submitting are going to be the 2020 tax returns, not the 2021. So when you're filling out the FAFSA, just make sure that you're loading the correct year if you're using the tool that they have on the FAFSA website, and inputting the correct year's tax returns.
Great, thank you, Jeff. Another question, and something sort of you insinuated was that that financial aid is not just for incoming freshmen, and that this process is not just for first year students, so that students could apply later, even if they don't apply as a freshman. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. As we stated during the professional judgment piece, things happen. Family situation changes. For it could be that you know that you didn't apply your first year because your family's financial situation provided the means of paying for college, and you didn't have to apply for anything, so you didn't go through the process. But let's say the next year, for the sophomore year, there was a drastic reduction in income, there was a loss of job, or whatever the situation may be, you can always continue and apply for this, during the second year as a continuing student. The financial aid office might ask, what happened? Like, why did you apply this year but not the previous year? And they might ask what changed in that family's financial picture. So just be prepared for that. And scholarships, that's stuff that you can always apply for at any point. Just make sure that you adhere to the deadlines. If you are one day late for most scholarships, that's going to be a reason enough for them to say, no, you're not going to be eligible for this scholarship because you are not on time. So really pay attention to those deadlines. But yes, there's plenty of scholarships out there for continuing students as well.
Good. Keeping track of deadlines so critical, and there's so many of them floating around. In a similar vein, Jeff, does financial aid stay the same from year to year, or is it updated? Can aid be added? Is aid ever taken away? And do families sort of have to go through, if they want to be considered for aid, a really similar process kind of year after year?
Sure. This is going to vary from school to school, but for the most part, especially for schools that say that they will meet 100% of a student's need, assuming that a family's financial picture stays the same from year to year, they can expect their financial aid offer to remain the same from year to year. So it won't be a situation where nothing changes on the family's part, but your financial aid suddenly gets reduced in a subsequent year. That shouldn't be happening. But definitely research that with every school, because schools have very different financial aid policies.
Great. Another question from an attendee tonight. Jeff, do retirement accounts get counted as part of the consideration for aid?
For the most part, retirement accounts are not considered when calculating the expected family contribution.
Great. And one more thing I wanted to kind of, I'm sorry if I missed this, but just to make sure we circled back, I know there was something on kind of the 5 most common mistakes about setting up a savings account in your student's name, and that may potentially be a pitfall or a mistake. Is it true that that's something that families should avoid, or that could be considered a mistake?
It can be considered a mistake because financial aid does assess a student's assets more heavily than they do a parent's assets. So if a student savings account is set up under a parent's name and is considered a parent's asset, it won't be assessed as heavily, and therefore it could potentially not increase the student's expected family contribution as much as it would if, let's say, there's a student savings account that is under the student's name.
Wow, that's really interesting. I had no idea. So Jeff, thank you so much for answering all of these questions. Folks, I hope many of you got your questions answered both during the presentation and then here. But of course, we want to respect everyone's time. We're just about a little over an hour now. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending tonight. And at this time, we want to launch one final poll just to get some feedback, asking you all for some feedback. So if you would please take just a moment before you go to complete the poll before logging off. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. Now there's going to be a few questions. So just take a few moments to give us some feedback. That would be really helpful and appreciated. Jeff, thank you so much.
No problem. My pleasure.